Hello, welcome to the Vineyard Church podcast. For more information, visit us at vkcwest.com.
So after 2 weeks off, we are coming back to the book of Daniel. We took a week off for our youth and young adult Sunday, and last Sunday we had Mother's Day with some of the women of our church sharing. Wasn't that good? Just so encouraging hearing their lives and things that God's shown them and how to love their children and raise a family. So good stuff. In Daniel, we've been focusing on the theme of faithfulness. The faithfulness of God and the faithfulness of his people in times of adversity. We left off last time with, if you remember, the king of Babylon at the time. He threw a drunken orgy and just, he decided, I'm just going to top any other party that, in any other way, 1,000 people. And right as he's having the party, God puts a hand. It's just a hand appears and he writes many Tarkle something, and it means like, measured, weighed, counted, like, you're done. And right at that point, there was an army of the Medo-Persian Empire that was right at the gates, and they stopped the water. Historical fact, you can look it up. They stopped the water going in, and they went in the waterway and attacked and took over. And that was the end of the Babylonian Empire. And so now we have King Darius, and he's ruling, and he kind of set some things in place to rule in a new way. And so that's where we start today. But I will say this is the second to last chapter that was written in Aramaic. The book was written half in Aramaic, half in Hebrew, and because it's written to those that are in captivity. And during this time, they were living amongst the Babylonians, so it's in Aramaic. But next week, what we begin with, it talks about the end of the world. Chapters 7 through 12, it talks about prophecy of the things to come, and some of the things have been fulfilled and some haven't. And so I wanted us to see the theme of faithfulness in the book, but then I wanted us to wrestle with some of the things that God says have come and will come. For instance, when we get to chapter 9 of Daniel, which it shifts to Hebrew at chapter 8, it actually tells the day that Jesus, the Messiah, would ride into Jerusalem, what we know as Palm Sunday. You can sit there and you can count the days from when an edict was put out to the day that Jesus actually rode into Jerusalem. It was that accurate. So we're about to walk into some deeper waters, and it's important that we look at what we look at today as readers today, and then also the readers then, because the things that Daniel talks about in the chapters after are just, they're pretty gnarly. Like they're pretty difficult stuff, and it shows the world and what's going to happen with the world and all sorts of things. So it's important that the reader from thousands of years ago and the reader today remembers that God is the living God, that God is the powerful God, that God is the God of all creation, and there's actually no other gods. And he's in control, and he is working, as we sang today, even though we don't feel it. So that's what we end with today in this portion of Daniel. Let's read. Daniel chapter 6, verse 1. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. So it was a different way of governing than was happening with the Babylonians. And I think there's several different reasons for it. I think there was mismanagement amongst the different regions. And you see that there was actually governors put over the satraps, and there was theft by some of those people. So they were taking advantage of the new king. And there was 3 governors that were put over, and Daniel was one of those governors. And in the midst of this miraculous story we're going to read, we see, I don't think we need to pass over too quickly that this whole story happens at Daniel's workplace. I mean, think about that. It's miraculous. It just draws us in what we're going to see. We're looking at Daniel in the lion's den, if you know the story. But it all happens at his workplace. And maybe at your workplace, you've never been put into a lion's den for, being competition amongst your coworkers, or maybe you have, I don't know, or it's felt like it. But God is shaping all of history in an entire nation at somebody's workplace. And, he's doing that today. A lot of times we think that God is doing his major things in church buildings. Yeah, he's doing stuff here for sure, but really, contextually, this is the locker room. The real stuff that's happening is out at your workplace. My workplace? Yeah, your workplace. Like the God of all the universe is there. He intimately knows every person that you work with. And he actually shapes and moves and guides the world in all of eternity in the lives of the people that you work with. And this is big stuff here. And yet God is working similar stuff at your workplace. And so I don't want to go past that. That let God's kingdom come at our workplaces. That God would move in the lives of the people that we see every day. I mean, it's kind of interesting. A lot of times we spend more time with the people we work with than the people in our homes. And so let God's kingdom come in the places that we work. So verse 3, it says, "Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find ground for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, 'We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God.'" So verse 3, it says Daniel distinguished himself. It's something for us to think about. What distinguishes me? Is to ask of ourselves, when people think of me, what distinguishes me? Like what stands out? And we don't want to go for perfection by any means. And Daniel wasn't perfect, although it kind of seems like he is, right? And that's one reason why, these guys are so upset. They're competitive because he's getting all the attention. But it's to ask, what really sets me apart in my workplace or in my home or in my neighborhood? It says in verse 3 that he had exceptional qualities, but really the word here is ruach, and so like spirit. And so Daniel 4 and 5 and verse 12 of chapter 5. And so it's these guys are not, they're not Jews. And so they look at them and they're kind of filtering through, like they're pantheistic, there's many gods and spirits and things. And they're looking at him, they're just like, man, there's just this exceptional spirit in him. And, the Holy Spirit was on his life. And so that was something that stands out for Daniel. In verse 4, it says there was no corruption in him. He was not the guy to go to and say, could you just fudge that report a little bit? Could you just kind of tweak that number a little bit? Can we just cook the books a little bit? You don't need to put it on the stove. Just put it in the microwave, just real quick. Just change it up a little bit, because if you don't do that, then the boss is going to get upset and we're going to lose our bonus and that sort of thing. Or if we do that, we're going to pay more taxes. Or, there was no corruption in Daniel whatsoever. I wonder if he used the company pin that had the logo. I wonder if he ever had any of those at home though. Even the best of us have messed up that way, right? Like, oh man. By the way, the Vineyard pins, you can take it as many as you like. So don't, all of a sudden a bunch of pins come back. So the Vineyard pins are for you to take. It says he was trustworthy, right? Break that down. He was worthy of trust. If we could have more people that we work with in our lives that were worthy of our trust, right? We don't know how important trust is until it's broken. How hard it is to gain back the trust of people that you break trust with. And then he was neither corrupt nor negligent. The negligent is interesting. It means he was just on it. And he's in his 80s or 90s at this point, and he's just all together. But the other administrators and satraps used their power to silence and ruin Daniel. At least that was their plan. And so think about that. We have people in our world today too, right? That, they get to the top of government or they get into a high position, and instead of helping people, instead of fixing the problems that we have going on, they're just going to try to gain security and power at whatever means. I mean, isn't that a picture of our world today that, we elect people and we get people into office and we do certain things and we like the things that they say, and yet we know from stories that behind closed doors, or even sometimes in the hearings that we see, that it's just a nasty thing. That it's just the clamoring and going after and just getting power and putting people down. And if there's a weakness in anybody, they go after it and just compromising principles and values. And that's what we see here. These guys just, instead of maybe fixing the problems, they're trying to tear down Daniel and really silence him, right? I mean, because they would silence him because he would shine light, right? I mean, one of the biggest things I pray for in our church is that God would shine light into every pocket of darkness in our lives. Is that we would not be able to hide anything from God, that we would not have any secrets, that we would not have any just things that we do that we hide in the darkness, that it's just like, I know this damages my relationship with God or my spouse or the people around me, but I just, I don't know, it's no big deal. That there be no pockets of darkness in our lives and our hearts, because we want light, right? God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. And so the more we walk in the light as he is in the light, then we see God move in our lives, in our church, in our city. And yet, these guys just want to bring more and more hiddenness as they go. But they couldn't find anything. Let that be true of us, is that people look for things to grab onto. They would have nothing to grab onto in our lives. Why was this, though? Why were they not able to find anything? Well, it was because above all else, Daniel honored God. He just decided, my one thing is going to be honoring God. Above all else, I'm going to live in the light as he is in the light. And he's just going to do that. The other rulers, they sought power and security, and yet, as we're going to read, it eluded them. They could not catch that chicken. Or that greased pig, or whatever you want to call it. They just wanted power and security, yet they made that their goal, yet it eluded them. And yet Daniel sought God, and he had security and power. You see, the things we long for in life, they're a byproduct many times. And so for the Christian, we seek God, and then we get those things. But it comes through honoring him. Over the last 7 days, I was a part of 2 graduations, one college, one high school, and then a wedding. And I wasn't a part of it, I was just a spectator. And, there's certain rules or traditions at graduations and weddings and things. And the wedding was yesterday, and it was beautiful, just up in St. Joe, out in the country. It was just amazing. But, for weddings, an unspoken rule is, maybe it's not unspoken, but you don't be late. Like, because it's not like you can all sneak in the back. That's kind of a problem at a wedding, right? Like, because if it's starting, like, the bride's there and hey, how's it going? Good to see you. Thanks for inviting me. You just don't want to be there. So we got there pretty early, and just everybody was there early. And everybody sat down. It's like the one thing that everybody's early for, because you're supposed to do that. And then graduations, we started, my oldest graduated college, not this Saturday, last Saturday, and then my youngest son graduated high school on Tuesday. And at both of the graduations, they've started this for several years. They say, okay, now listen, here's the rules. Hold the applause till the end. We're going to read the name, and we know you're excited for your graduate, but hold the applause till the end. And I always feel bad for the first people because it's evident that they're breaking the rules, right? And they get rolling and, so John Abraham, and, but it always, all of a sudden you hear like, woo, woo. And then it's kind of like, and then somebody goes, and then it's kind of, and then people get this, they get emboldened by each kind of family that says, I'm not going to they've done I have to honor them, I'm not going to do this. And you get to the end and it's like a dance party. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, when it comes to us, like we're going to do it, but we're not, and so I'm just like, okay. And my boys are like, yeah, going for it. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And so, but isn't that like that? Like, the world says, don't honor God. Can you just be quiet about God? Can you just hold your applause till it's just more appropriate? I mean, isn't that the message of the way of the world? It's just like, don't talk about God. Like, don't honor God. Don't bring him into situations. And, you'll see players and athletes and, sometimes actors that, they'll give glory to God and honor to God. And some people, oh gosh, why are you doing that? And it's just like, why are you doing that? Because they've decided with their life they will honor God. And somehow, and it's really demonic. It's really like, no, at your work, don't honor God, or at your, just keep it here. I mean, can you imagine? I think most of us would like get in a fight if somebody said, hey, listen, I know, like if you talked about like your wife or kids, I know you love your wife and kids, but don't talk about them. Like just, we don't want to hear any of that, right? And that's what they're saying, like with God, like don't honor God. And that's what they're trying to do with Daniel here. They're trying to keep him down. And what happens though is when somebody decides to honor God with their life, what happens is that God then gives them power to live and to bring glory to him, to bring honor to him. You see, God pours out his rain on the just and the unjust. I mean, that's the interesting thing, is that God is blessing everybody, whether they acknowledge him or honor him or not. But something amazing happens when somebody says, I, in return, am going to honor him, which is God then honors the person that honors them, primarily, though, with the ability to honor him. Like, if you want to know, like, what's the biggest thing that you get if you decide to honor God, is he's going to empower you to honor him. It's not about the stuff that you get. It's that all of a sudden, you will be someone that is able to bring honor to God, that when people are going through things, good or bad, they want you there. Why? Because they know with you there, you bring the presence and the power of God. And you don't have to be special to have that. All you have to be is one that trusts in the living God. And so Daniel made honoring God his one thing in life, and God honored him by giving him strength to distinguish himself and live worthy of trust. Now, in verse 6 through 10, it says, so these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, may King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to God, just as he had done before. As my dad is a cowboy and horseman, and so I grew up on property, and we had horses and cowboy boots and the whole deal, and just enjoyed it. And so when I look at things, a lot of times like ideas of fences and saddles come into mind. And, if you're to straddle a fence or to be on the fence, that's King Darius. He is He's abdicated his leadership. You see, he delegated, and you say, well, that's wise, but he had abdicated his leadership. He put it out there and said, you guys go do these things in the land, but he checked out. He wasn't involved. And what happened was he was passive and he was indecisive. And so it opened him up to being taken advantage of. You see verse 2, may King Darius live forever. He was manipulated. There was flattery that was used. And then they say to him, everyone's agreed that you need to do this. Well, I know there's at least one, like Daniel didn't agree to this. And maybe others didn't agree to it, but they come in and they're manipulating him because he's straddling the fence. He's sitting on the fence. He's not decided about who he will be character-wise and how he will live. And where it says he put the decree in writing in verse 9, it actually is not he wrote this up. They basically handed it to him, said, here, sign this. He was just kind of like, yeah, whatever you guys want. See, he had all this power in this leadership, and yet he stopped leading. And think about this. Every single one of us today has been given something to rule over and to lead. Every single one of us. And the temptation is to check things out and just to automate everything and just say, it's cool. But God has given you a family to lead, or a business to lead, or a department to lead, or a job to do. And we can check out really easily. And we end up like Darius, and we end up on the fence, and this is what happens to us. But then there's Daniel, and Daniel's saddled up. Because I spent most of my childhood on the fence. Like when my dad was working with horses or animals, right? He was a contractor, but then he was also a farrier, a horseshoer. And so when he'd be working with horses, so stay on the fence. And so I'd sit on the fence and watch, right? And but there was times though when he wasn't around where I was on the fence and I said, I'm tired of being on the fence. And so I'd go, Sis was one of our horses. So a couple of times I called her over, and I think I was 5. And my girlfriend, Christy, was over. She was 6. And her family had milk and stuff, and everybody in the neighborhood went and bought milk from them and stuff. But besides that doesn't really matter, does it? So that doesn't flow into the story. But she was over, and so I told my mom we're going down the horses, and I was tired of being on the fence. I'd watch my dad ride or do different things, and so I just said, hey, watch this. And so called Sis over, and I just jumped on Sis, and I got about 8 feet, and Sis bucked me off. But there's a difference between being in the saddle and being on the fence. And God is always calling us to get off the fence. He's calling us to come to him. We love that he gave everything for us, but he also calls us to give everything to him. And so Daniel made honoring God his one thing. And so when he heard the decree, he did just as he'd done before. Recognize that he didn't say, I'll show you guys. He just did his normal deal. This is what he always did. And so he said, I'm not going to change what I do because there's a threat of doing it. I'm just going to do what I always do. And there's only 3 instances of kneeling prayer actually found in the Old Testament. This is one of them. The other was the first was King Solomon, prayer for dedication of the first temple. And it was interesting. He prayed, somehow prophesied that the people of Israel would be in captivity. He prayed for them in that time. Daniel's praying in the midst of captivity. But then Ezra prays after the captivity, and he repents for the nation's sin. These are the only times in the Old Testament where we see kneeling prayer happen. But because of his consistent practice of meeting with God, Daniel was able to honor God in everyday life. So recognize that, while it's good to be vocal about honoring God and say, I give all glory to God, and to speak of what God is doing, that is not where we start. We start by building a deep inner life with God, with him, being with him. Jesus spoke of this. Matthew 6, 3-6 says, But when you give to the needy, do not let your hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray, standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they've received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father, now listen, who sees what is done in secret will reward you. So it's developing this inner life with God, and then that works itself out that God rewards us openly. The openly is not the goal, but we're able to do it openly because we have that inner life. And that's for Daniel. He was just unshakable. And yet, as I talk to a lot of Christians, there's a lot of Christians that are bored. And there's a lot of Christians that their main interaction with God is like, God, help me to stop doing these things. Help me to stop, sinning. Help me to stop. Most Christians I talk to are just managing their sin. And I just don't see that. We get this trap of I've just got to get, this all together. And absolutely, we should feel convicted of our sin, but we don't get it taken care of the way that we think. You see, our sin was paid for on the cross of Christ. And he rose from the grave, and we rise with him to live a new life. And so our problem isn't necessarily purity, like we're supposed to focus on purity. Our problem is that we forget our purpose. Our problem is that we forget that we're sons and daughters of the living God that are taking part in the mission of Jesus to rescue the world, and that we carry the message of God in Jesus, of the kingdom of God invading time and space into the world. And so as we focus on our purpose, it's an amazing thing that happens, is that we get a whole lot more pure. Viktor Frankl, who wrote a book about man's search for meaning, he was a psychologist, and he was a Holocaust survivor. He says, when a man can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure. Isn't that true? And a lot of Christians say, well, why am I still sinning? Or why am I still doing these things? Or why am I still... Well, listen, have you taken the kingdom of God and then brought it into direct conflict with that stuff? In other words, or have you kind of said, I believe all this stuff about Jesus, but I still want to be entertained by the world. I still want to be pleasured in this way. I still want to be entertained in this way, but I believe all of this stuff. And so I don't know that I'm going to break it. Well, have you brought the full force of the kingdom of God into direct conflict with the things that you struggle with? In other words, man, I'm done. God, get this stuff. Just get it. Or we have a dog and 2 cats, and the dog loves to play with the cats, and I'll tell him, get them. He chases them and does stuff, whatever, and it's just, get them. And he laughs. I mean, I'm sorry, you're kind of like, he's crazy. Dogs don't laugh. Yes, they do. My dog laughs. But do you ever see that? Dogs kind of seem like they have a smile. But I'll just tell him, get them, and go after. I mean, you and I can do that with the things in our lives that hamper us. God, get it. Get it. Break the power of that in my life. And so to straddle is to believe, but still looking for entertainment and satisfaction from the world. But yet to saddle is to be a learner or an apprentice of Jesus. To be a learner, apprentice of Jesus. That's what we're to do. And so distressed Darius, verse 11 through 18, is having issues. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and make every effort until sundown to save him. When the law went into effect, or if somebody was found guilty of a crime, they had to be punished that day. So there was it's just like, yep, done. And so then the men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, may your God whom you serve continually rescue you. And a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of the nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. So Darius is now distressed because opening himself up to deception. And it says the king could not sleep. Do you notice that they don't talk about the emotions of Daniel at all? Not one bit. They don't talk about the emotions of Daniel at all. I mean, it just seems like he's continuing on. So why the spotlight on the king and not on the lion's den? When things are volatile, the action is always amongst the unsettled, amongst the people that are straddling the fence. The action isn't with those that have decided that their full trust is to honor God. That's not where the action is. It's amongst those that they haven't settled the matter. Like they haven't settled, think about it. Somebody that is on the fence about God is trying to decide between false gods that are actually not even alive at all. They're just created by humans, right? Any gods, we just create gods in our own image in our own ways. Or deep down, I think if people are undecided, it's, am I God or is God God? Right? And so when things happen, it's pretty unsettling. See, Daniel surrendered to honoring God. It's a habit of doing so. No pressure, law, situation, or change will influence that. Doesn't that sound like a good way to live? That, the news, the economy's up, the economy's down. This is happening or this is happening. That just, it's settled. That's exciting and sounds interesting, but ultimately, I'm settled. It's just set. So Daniel apparently is just sleeping while the king was struggling, and yet one's in a lion's den and the other is in the palace. Pretty interesting. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. And when he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions? Daniel answered, may the king live forever. My God sent his angel and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in God. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. I want to stop right there. I think it's a warning here. This isn't the direct application of this, but is husbands and wives and sons and daughters, the things that you and I do affect our families. These guys are playing games and they're trying to manipulate and they're really committing murder. And then it trickles down to their wives and their children. And so don't be a game player. Don't play games. It will affect your wives and your children. I've seen it too many times that I don't even want to tell you about. Because typically, this is what's sad, is that typically when somebody's sitting before me, the damage is mostly done. And while God can heal hearts, many times the circumstances are set. And so stay far away from things that will harm you or harm your family. Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language in all the earth, "May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. And he rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. And he rescued Daniel from the power of the lions." So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius, in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Now Cyrus is the one that gives the decree. And some people think they're actually the same person. There's a little bit of confusion about that. But Cyrus gives the decree to actually for the Jews to go back to their land after 70 years of captivity. But Darius says, the living God. That was an Old Testament title for God declaring that he's active and powerful. He's contrasting the life of the true God with the lifeless idols that everyone else worshipped. It says that God's angels shut the mouths of the lions. God's presence was with Daniel. I wonder, maybe you have a lion's den today. I wonder if you feel that in your workplace or your home or in your neighborhood, or whether it's figuratively or you're there, and God is with you. God is with you in that. He's actually, there's nothing that can keep him from that. But to the extent that you experience his care or his intervention, typically has to do with the extent that you have built a life with him. You see, things happen to us. We say, "Where is God?" And God is right there. He's loving. He's kind. He's near, just as a parent is with a small child that gets hurt, and he's just there ministering. But the problem is that we haven't tuned our hearts to him. If we don't have a inner life with him, in those moments, he's right there. He's caring for us. And yet, to the extent that we've actually built to know him is to the extent we experience him many times. It says that Daniel was innocent in his sight, and he hadn't done any wrong. All right, that's righteousness, right? I mean, don't we all want that? A right relationship with people and a right relationship with God. And it's also good to ask ourselves, do we live like verses 26 and 27 are true? That this is who God is. He's working in time and space. So to close, the chaos was in the king's palace, the world's way. It looks pretty good. There's a lot of really tempting stuff in the ways of the world. And yet that's where all the chaos is. Well, calm ruled in the lion's den, which is God's way. And so honor God so that you are under the will of God, not the will of man. Honoring God also, you need to know this, may appear that the world wins for a moment, and yet it's really not true. We see that with Jesus, right? Jesus was put into a tomb and it was sealed, and yet 3 days later he rose again and defeated death itself. That theme is over and over again in our lives. And so may we do and remember Philippians 4:6-7. It says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition with thanksgiving present our requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." Right? All understanding means that, why do I have such peace when everything around me tells me something different? That's the thing that doesn't make sense, is that I can have peace when everything is not right.
Thanks for listening this week. If you are looking for ways to serve, give, or get connected, go to bkcwest.com.